So is there anybody out there? For me, reminds me of there's a Pink Floyd song. I know we don't always like to talk about Pink Floyd these days because some of the members are a little bit infamous in their criticism of Israel, but music stands in the music is there, so it's there. But is there anybody out there? For some, brings to mind the show, The X-Files, or Star Trek, To Boldly Go, where no man has gone before, to seek new worlds, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you have that component. And I think it'll be kind of interesting to ask around whether people think the world exists outside of human beings outside of Earth, or whether they've seen UFOs, but I don't want to take the class down in that direction. But this series is called Ripped from the Headlines. And this was something that was being reported last week. The Israeli space chief says aliens may well exist, but they haven't met humans. That was the headline in Times of Israel less than a week ago. And so here you have the information. Here's some of the news report. Chaim Eshed, who headed Israel's space security program for 30 years, has been in the spotlight in recent days after claiming that aliens exist, that Israel and the US have long been in contact with them, and that Donald Trump is going to blab, but the extraterrestrial being of the Galactic Federation stopped him. Eshed said aliens conduct experiments on Earth, and there is a joint base underground on Mars where they collaborate with American astronauts. They asked us that we don't publicize they're here because humanity isn't ready. So that whole paragraph is so full of all sorts of, you wonder whether it belongs more in the Inquirer than in a newspaper. Galactic Federation sounds like something that's made up. Okay. Although the US is developing a space force, but not a Galactic Federation, conducting, there's a joint base underground on Mars. Haven't heard about that lately. And Donald Trump about to let us know about it, but the Galactic Federation stopped him. We could go on, and this has plenty of fodder for comedy. Maybe I will use some of it in my next stand-up comedy show. But the article continues, according to Isaac Ben Israel, chairman of the Israel Space Agency, Eshed went too far with his claims, which were published in an interview with the Israeli daily Yediot Ahronot. But his seriousness shouldn't be questioned, and his standing as a leader in his field remains intact. If I would have to choose one person to be called the father of Israel's space capabilities, it would be Chaim Eshed, Ben Israel told the Times of Israel on Thursday. All right, Israel has made some significant progress on space exploration. They're planning the next, they almost succeeded in the first moon landing. They're planning in 2024. And Isaac Ben Israel said that Eshed was a big part of that. As for his own view, Ben Israel said, I also think the probability is quite large. Right? Is there life outside? Is there other aliens may exist? The probability is quite large. Still, in my interpretation, I don't believe there are any physical encounters between us and aliens. Okay, so, Eshed may seem pretty wild in his claims, but here's someone else saying, yes, it's certainly possible, but we haven't had human alien contact, physical contact yet. He thinks that Eshed arrived at his theory invoking real information, including records of non-coherent signals from space, but interpret it wrongly. There's a lot of information gathered by Americans, and it's a matter of interpretation, said Ben Israel. Most people, including myself, interpret everything reported as natural phenomena. Some people interpret it as something different. If you have a very creative mind, you push toward the second option. So Ben Israel is highlighting there's all types of listening and paying attention to what's going on in outer space. And they're sending out signals, and signals are bouncing back. And so the question is, what are those? The question is, what are those signals?
I knew where they went. They ran out of it.
Who are you talking to?
The question is, what are those signals? And so you could, on one level, interpret them as natural phenomena, you can interpret them as alien life forms. And if you have a creative mind, as he says, Chaim Eshed does, you have alien life forms. So this is the article. This is news. This is not fiction. This is something that is being discussed. And there seems to be one very creative claim being made in the first paragraph by Chaim Eshed. And you have Ben Israel, who is pushing back against that, maybe trying to protect the reputation of an overzealously creative imagination on the part of a very well-respected Israeli space colleague, and saying that there's certainly some possibility, and he even says the probability is quite large. So here you have some significant scientists, some Israeli scientists saying that, is there anybody out there? The answer is yes. So what do we have from a Jewish perspective to give us some insight into this? And we'll start by saying that there is no clear-cut absolute opinion that says alien life forms exist or don't exist. I think that what we will see, like Ben Israel pointed out, sometimes there's a lot of information, and it depends how you want to interpret that information. And then we'll see a couple of views presented by some more contemporary authorities, rabbinic voices who began to really address this from a more practical level when space exploration started. As space exploration started, there were a whole host of issues that that impacted how Jews, as human beings, just like all human beings, view ourselves in the universe. One of the most famous manifestations of this was when human beings landed on the moon. And we say, we're about to celebrate Rosh Chodesh, which means that the Kiddush Levana ceremony that we praise for the new moon is going to be recited in the next couple of days. And so one of the things that we say about the moon is, Kashem Shani Roked Kenegdech, I'm here and I can dance here on earth looking at you or opposite you. Ve'eni yacholin goa bach, I'm not able to touch you. Kach lo yochlu kol oivai goa bilara. So hopefully my enemies won't be able to harm me or touch me or attack me either. So the whole premise is based on not being able to touch the moon. Well, wait a second. Who says I can't touch the moon? Man has landed on the moon. Maybe I'll be able to touch the moon. And this led to a certain, I wouldn't call it crisis, but certainly a curiosity as to, wait a second, was this composed in error? Was this composed and no longer, was this no longer applicable? Has it all changed? One of the most dramatic changes was suggested by Rabbi Goren in Israel, who said that we should change the language from Ve'eni yacholin goa bach, I'm not able to touch you, to Ve'eni nogea bach, I'm now not touching you. So that you're able to, keep the cadence and the rhythm of the passage. And I'm not able to touch you. I'm not touching you right now. So we want our enemies to keep their hands off of us and the like. And then, of course, the other factor of human beings traveling in space is whether Jewish law is applicable in space. What does someone who's traveling in outer space do if they want to practice Jewish law, right? It leads to the famous well-told joke about what happened. The first observant Jewish astronaut goes up into space and comes down after his stay there. And he gets back to his community and they say to him, so how was it? What was space like? He's like, it's exhausting because all day long, Shachas bin Chamar, Shachas bin Chamar, Shachas bin Chamar, Shachas bin Chamar. Every time you rotate, every time you make an orbit around the Earth, it's a whole day. So he's davening the whole time. So there are those who analyze that question and try to understand whether maybe this is something that is an issue, whether davening, or some even go far as to raise the possibility that Torah and mitzvahs are relevant on Earth and not relevant when leaving the Earth's atmosphere. So that kind of that kind of exploration from a religious perspective begins, in earnest when the space program starts. But what about extraterrestrial life? What about alien life? Where do we start encountering something maybe relating to that? So if we look at source number one, we see that maybe we can interpret from the very beginning an element of referencing life that's not human life. And this is the end of Parshas Bereshis, chapter 6, verses 2 through 4. Vayiru b'nei ha'Elohim es benos ha'adam ki tovos hena. The divine beings saw the beautiful daughters of men. Vayikhu lahem nashim mikol asher bacharu, and they chose wives from whoever pleased them. Vayomer Hashem lo yodon ruchi ba'adam li'olam b'shagam hu basar v'yomav me'av esrim yom. God said, my breath shall not abide in man forever, since he too is flesh. Let the days allowed him be 120 years. All right, this is the famous idea, because 120. We say that you live for 120 years because God realized that it's not good for man to live longer than that. They're flesh and blood. We don't want to have these extreme long lives, lifespans. Hanafilim hayu ba'aretz bayamim hahem v'gam acharei ken asher yavo b'nei Elohim el benos ha'adam v'yaldu lahem hema hagiborim asher me'olam anshe Hashem. It was then and later too that the Nephilim appeared on earth. When the divine beings cohabitated with the daughters of men who bore them offspring, they were the heroes of old, the men of renown. So, who are these Bnei Elohim? Are they powerful figures? Are they military? Are they mighty, strong individuals? What are the Nephilim? The word nofel means to fall. Maybe they fell from the heavens. This is where we get a lot of the imagery that we find in Milton's Paradise Lost. From these verses. Who are these Bnei Elohim? So, and we're calling them Elohim because these are not divine image of gods in which we would say Elohim. These are Bnei Elohim. These are not non-divine individuals. So who are they? Well, it seems that these are, they're not like humans. Nephilim, they fall from the heavens. Maybe there's some element of alien life form that somehow made its way here and walk among us, or started mating among us. Again, this is not usually how we learn this when we learn Parshas Bereshis for the first time. This is not how we learn this when we study the Parsha each year when we come to it. But if we're looking with an eye towards what kind of sources can we find that may hint to the idea that life outside of human beings exists, here is one of the verses that we can look at, starting with the book of Bereshis, starting with the book of Genesis. That's one biblical source. The next biblical source comes from Shiras Devorah, from the song of Devorah, right, the victory that the Jewish people had. And in that song, she says, Arur Meroz, Amar Malach Hashem, Arur, 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 Yoshveha, Kilovo, Le'ezras Hashem, Le'ezras Hashem, Bagiborim. Curse Meroz, said the angel of the Lord, bitterly curse its inhabitants, because they came not to the aid of the Lord, to the aid of the Lord among the warriors. So what or who is Meroz? So Rashi quotes one opinion is that this was a star. So if this is a star, we're cursing Meroz and we're cursing the inhabitants of Meroz. We're cursing the star of Meroz and we're cursing its inhabitants. According to others, it's a distinguished person who was near the battlefield but failed to appear. That's Rashi source number 3. So again, Meroz, the simple pshat explanation, it's a person who didn't show up. Maybe it's a place near the battlefield where the people should have helped the Jews in the battle but didn't. But Rashi is quoting a Gemara in Moed Katan that talks about this being a star. And here, Devorah is cursing a star and the inhabitants of a star. So we have, again, an on-ramp to a conversation of some kind of awareness of extraterrestrial life. Is, again, the Pashut Pshat, not so. But here we do have, in this case, it's the rabbis in the Talmud who are suggesting that there is that this is a place outside of Earth that has life. Again, questions, comments, feel free to unmute and ask, or else put something into the chat. But here what we've seen are a couple of biblical verses which give us at least a springboard to a conversation.
Since you offered to ask questions, okay. What's the traditional interpretation of Nephilim that we would have learned in elementary school?
Okay, so just one second. The traditional of Nephilim would be more in the line of giants, more, big beings like Og Melech HaBashan, I mean, that's how I remember learning it within that context. So when I learned about Og Melech HaBashan, he was the only other person to survive the Mabul, and he hung out to the outside of Noah's Ark. And he appears several other times in Midrashic literature with Avraham. In physical person, he appears with Moshe. So, I would say that the way I remember learning it and hearing it taught is these are kind of warriors. Maybe more brutal, savage, maybe larger, a little bit larger than life warriors. But that's the Nephilim. And also the idea of Elohim, which we use it to mean judges elsewhere in the Torah. Maybe these are the princes. But those are some of the more down-to-earth explanations of those. Anybody else? Okay, so we're going to look now at the Rambam. In the Rambam, in his Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah, talks about some of the fundamentals of faith. He talks about God, and he also throws in his philosophical understanding of the world and creation in these laws of Yesodei HaTorah. And within that, he talks about the universe and the celestial bodies, and he talks about angels. And here he mentions all of the stars and spheres are beings endowed with a soul, intelligence, and understanding. They continue a purposeful life and are conscious of the existence of him who spoke and the universe sprang forth. Each and every one, according to his greatness and degree, extol and glorify the Creator, as do the angels. And to the extent that they recognize the Holy One, blessed is he, they also know their own selves and the angels above them. But the intelligence of the stars and spheres is lesser than the intelligence of the angels, but greater than the intelligence of man. And this is a Greek philosophical idea of the role of intelligence. And angels are completely intellect, spiritual beings. Human beings are flesh and blood. And somewhere in between is the intelligence of the planets. And this is how Greek philosophy looked at the constellations, and Maimonides adopted it. It doesn't go against anything in the Torah. Because it doesn't relate to us because they're planets. So Maimonides here is not talking about us going to other planets, nor is Maimonides talking about life on other planets, but Maimonides is saying that the planets are alive. And so you do have that element of this idea that there is intellect, there is intelligence, there is something going on that is alive outside of human beings and on Earth. So you have that idea philosophically presented by the Rambam over here. So these are two psukim which allude. This is a parallel theme introduced by the Rambam of intellect, of intelligent life forms beyond human beings and extending to other planets. What about just the issue itself? Are there other worlds or are not? Has the question been tackled head on? So the answer is yes. And Chastai Crescas, Jewish philosopher, Spain, 14th century, he lived 1340 to 1411, talks about this issue very clearly in his Or Hashem, the Light of God, his philosophical treatise, where it raises the issue, are there lives on other planets? And this is he goes back and forth in terms of maybe yes, maybe no. What would be the reasons to say yes? What would be the reasons to say no? And he, towards the conclusion of this chapter 2, section 4, chapter 2, he says, Shekvar hispaer, we've explained, she'ein b'chol hatano shezacharnu im letzad hachiyuv, im letzad hashlila, she'yitain ha'emes bidrush. We can't really come to a definitive conclusion that there's absolutely definitely life elsewhere, or there's absolutely no life elsewhere. Right? There's a significant possibility that yes. And he invokes a Gemara in Avodah Zarah in the first chapter. It's on Daf Gimel. That's describing what God does with God's day, and it's a very, very anthropomorphic Gemara. It's the Gemara in the same area where it talks about the world existing for 6,000 years, and then goes into what God does during the day. And one of the things is that God spends time sheshat, right? The idea that he, in a sense, similar to the idea that he sails or floats or swims through the 18,000 olamos. There are 18,000 olamos which God zooms through every day as part of his daily routine. Think about the morning jog or something like that. So God has his 18,000 world pass by. And the idea that God's influence, hashgacha, God's divine providence, extends extends everywhere. And this is what we've been trying to discuss in this drasha, in this passage, in this interpretation. So Chasdai, Rabbi Chasdai says that, is there life on other planets? Well, there certainly is the possibility. There's nothing that negates the possibility. And in fact, there are sources which indicate that there's certainly is that possibility. Is that what it means that God goes through the 18,000 worlds? No, not definitively, but it seems that Rabbi Chasdai Kreskas likes to focus on the possibility. And even those who would like to reject the possibility, he pushes back on that and would like to rather instead point out that there is more likelihood that it is possible. So, and there are other Jewish philosophers who address this subject. Rabbi Yosef Albo, who was a later contemporary of Kreskas. He lived also in Spain, 1380 to 1444. He doesn't like Kreskas's interpretation. In general, these different views have been quoted, by other later authorities, and this is not something that you have like a machlokes on the laws of Shabbos, where you have a definitive psak. You have a discussion in different ways as to whether or not there's life on other planets. As you might be able to imagine, and I saw someone talked a little bit about visions in Yecheskel. As you can imagine, there's a more mystical view of the world, found in various Zohar texts, Kabbalistic texts like the Zohar and Zohar Chadash do raise the possibility of there being life on other planets. And this is something that Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan addresses, source number 6. The basic premise that of all possible species, only man has free will, to typo, is well supported by the great Kabbalist Rabbi Moshe Cordovero in his Pardes Rimonim. Using typological arguments, he demonstrates that there can be only one set of spiritual worlds. Although God would want to maximize the number of recipients of his good, his very unity precludes the existence of more than one such set. This set of worlds deals specifically with God's providence toward man because of his free will. This also precludes the existence of another species sharing this quality. So here, Kaplan talks about the possibility of there being other lives and other beings, but the only ones who have the type of neshama or spiritual opportunities, the only ones are human beings on Earth. And we're going to see this is something that gets this idea of potential for other life forms, but only one human being, and going more even singularly, even only one Jewish nation, is something we'll see with Norman Lamb, the next source. But I see Elliot has his hand up, so please unmute and feel free to ask or comment. You have to unmute.
Am I good now?
You're good.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, it's a twofold thing. Well, number one, do the rabbis from Rashi to Rambam the existence of the outer world there, and what would be the purpose of that outer world? basically.
So again,
all these things are all a reflection of the sun. We would not see them without the light of the sun. So that's the other part.
So I don't think that we're seeing necessarily the fact that that Rashi or Rambam are staking out positions. Getting back to, for example, the case that Rashi, when he talks about Meroz, from the pasuk in Shoftim. I don't necessarily think that Rashi is taking a stance on extraterrestrial life. Rashi usually, as he likes to say, pshuto shel mikra, tries to present the simple explanation, although not necessarily the most simple explanation, because it would be much easier for Rashi to only quote one opinion there. But Rashi is trying to get us thinking as to what's the Torah perspective on this topic, right? It's actually very, it's a helpful point that Elliot, that you're making. That why does Rashi have to talk about Meroz as a star? In which case, a star has other inhabitants. So clearly, Rashi is trying to get us to pay some attention to this verse in Devorah's song, and that there's one level of interpretation that it's the people or the place of the locale who didn't help, but the rabbis in Moed Katan were thinking more universally into what this can represent, what the word Meroz is. And again, keep in mind that it's not that that Chazal were ignoring the realms and the constellations. The idea of a zodiac and the idea of being born at certain opportune times, in when one is born, impacting one's life or the path that one's life take is not something that's alien to Judaism. We believe at the end of the day, Ein Mazal Yisrael, right? There's no luck or there's no constellations that necessarily shape our destiny without exception, because God is in control. At the same time, they talk about someone born in Ma'adim, someone born under the sign of Mars, might be someone who's very violent, and maybe that person should be a shochet, because then you're taking your violence and applying it to a mitzvah purpose, right? You're not taking it to injure or kill for no reason. You're killing for a mitzvah, for the mitzvah of shechita. We always discuss this time of year. There's a Hasidic practice based on a Kabbalistic practice that some have, that not to make Kiddush on red wine between 6 and 7 p.m. And that also is based on this idea of Ma'adim, of Mars, and Mars being a violent time, and not wanting to add any type of spiritual energy, not to involve ourselves in our own special spiritual practices during this period of time. And I remember this always growing up, that if you look at the timing of it, so this time of year, Shabbos starts at 4:10. So if you get finished davening, davening's 4. You finish davening, get home around 5:30. You got to make Kiddush fast, because if you don't make it by 6, you can't make it till 7. And then the question is that only red wine? Can you use white wine and grape juice? And these are the kind of conversations you can have for those who are more Hasidically or Kabbalistically inclined. From a simple halachic point of view, it's not an issue whatsoever, and you can make Kiddush at any time. But this idea is being influenced by this more broad, this more universal look at things like Meroz. We're coming up next week on Christmas. There's what's called Nittelnacht, people who don't study Torah on Christmas Eve. And that too is connected in some Kabbalistically inclined and Hasidic circles for not involving ourselves in our spiritual practices at the times that are quote unquote controlled by the evil spiritual forces. So, so I think that it's not necessarily Rashi or Rambam taking a definitive stance on these things, but they do recognize the possibility that the world is much bigger than we necessarily usually spend time giving it credit for. And whether that's midrashically, allegorically, mystically, based on what Rashi is interpreting, or from the Rambam, is very much influenced by the philosophy that he studied and put into his thinking. That's the direction they take it. Here, as we start moving away from the more theoretical into how is it viewed practically, you see that, it's okay for there to be other life forms as long as we recognize that only human beings, are nivra yechidi, as the Mishnah in Sanhedrin says. A human being, we are the pinnacle of creation. And we have to remember, the Mishnah there talks about we're the pinnacle of creation, but the animal kingdom came first, and there's a certain balance that we have to have, that the world is ours to conquer, as it says in Bereshit, but we are ultimately human beings, and we're mere mortals. So there's that balance. But here, the possibility of alien life or extraterrestrial life is such that it should not divert us from the fact that we as human beings were given the mission to have this special relationship. It's not that the infinite God could share that spiritual mission far and wide throughout the galaxy. It's only there for us. And this gets, I guess I would say, channeled into more practical terms, moving away from mysticism, by Norman Lamb, who had an essay that came out in 1971. It was included in his book Faith and Doubt, source number 7. The discovery of fellow intelligent creatures elsewhere in the universe, if they indeed do exist, will deepen and broaden our appreciation of the mysteries of the Creator and his creations. Man will be humble, but not humiliated. Judaism is only for those who identify as Jews here on earth. Torah was given to man on earth, and its concern is limited to terrestrial affairs. So Norman Lamb reminds us, you could say he definitely on that continuum of there certainly is a possibility of life elsewhere. And in general, we are supposed to be humbled and awed by the vastness of creation, which may contain other forms of life. But remember, there's only one set of us. There's only one set of Jews. There's only one Torah, and the Torah is only here. His invoking this idea that Hashemayim Shemayim Lashem Va'aretz Nasam Livnei Adam. We said it in Hallel this morning. The heavens for God, but the earth is given to man. The idea that Torah belongs on earth, that's very much, there's only one Torah, only one Jewish people, on only one planet. So we may have a worldwide Jewish organization, but we'll never have a galactic federation of Jews. I think it's hard enough to get Jews to agree on one planet. Imagine if we had to, get more and more involved. But that's also the idea that the Torah is on earth and not in the heavens. That connects with what we started with, the whole idea of whether there's Judaism once you clear the atmosphere and make your way into outer space. Maybe Torah is only given to Jewish people on earth and doesn't apply elsewhere. But that's not Lamb's discussion. It's the idea that we are part of a vast universe which may contain alien life forms. But remember, Judaism and Torah and the mission of humanity is only found on planet Earth. The last source was the response. There was a scientist by the name of Velvel Green, a Hasidic scientist by the name of Velvel Green, who was enlisted by NASA in their project to determine if there was life on Mars. And he asked the Lubavitcher Rebbe whether he should do it or not. And this is the answer that the Rebbe gave as recorded in Green's book, the Rebbe and the Scientist, Looking for Life on Mars, the story that he tells. So Dr. Green, look for life on Mars. And if you don't find it there, look somewhere else in the universe for it. Because for you to sit here and say that there's no life outside of planet Earth is to put limitations on the Creator. And that is not something any of his creatures can do. So the idea that to say that there's no life anywhere else is limiting, there's no possibility of life is something that is limiting, God's abilities, and no one should ever be involved in that. To me, this invokes the Mishnah, Hafoch ba dekula ba. We say in Pirkei Avos that you should study it, and ultimately keep trying. And that was the Rebbe's advice to Green. There's nothing anti-Jewish about looking for life on Mars. There's nothing anti-Jewish about exploring any of these subjects which may challenge our understandings, because to say so would be to limit God's creations. This only brings to mind the kind of a theological, philosophical challenge. Can God create a stone that's too heavy for God to lift? Right? Because if he can, then you're limiting God. But if he can't, you're limiting God. So how do you answer the question? So I always like to say that can God create a stone that's too heavy for God to lift? Yes, but then God lifts it anyway. So we're not limited. The fact that, are there little green men somewhere doing something, putting on talis and tefillin? Right? Norman Lamb would seem to say that's not the direction that we have when it comes to these things, carrying forward that tradition of, the way Rabbi Moshe Cordovero looks at it Kabbalistically from Aryeh Kaplan, as brought down. And, so for Lamb, the focus is creation is vast, other lives may exist, but let's focus on what we're supposed to do on this planet, our humanity, our Judaism. And Lubavitcher Rebbe is not disagreeing, but recognizing, have fun with it. Go all out. Could there be life elsewhere? Sure. Maybe there's no life elsewhere. Also, sure. It's all about optimizing our involvement in trying to understand God's creation, which is part of our divine service. So for any extraterrestrials who may have tuned into this year or may find this recording, hopefully you come in peace. And otherwise, I think that one of the things that emerges from this, and especially remember, we started with 2 Israeli scientists who are talking about this possibility. One who says it's there, and one who's maybe not as sure, but still says it's possible. Maybe the lesson is to continue that exploration, an exploration that has a certain rabbinic context, as mentioned by Rashi, an intellectual context, as mentioned by the Rambam, a Kabbalistic idea, as may influence how we view ourselves as the only Jews and the only human beings in a broader universe, or as the Rebbe said, go for it. And if you don't find it, keep on looking. I think, being intellectually and spiritually curious is pretty good advice. So happy now at this time